السادة المشاهدين، تحية طيبة أينما كنتم. في حوارية جديدة من حواريات المركز الليبي للأبحاث والدراسات، نستضيف فيها ضيفا عزيزا وموضوع جديد. هذا الضيف جاءنا من روسيا، نتناقش فيه أو نتناول في هذه الحوارية إن شاء الله عن مسيرة استقلال ليبيا من المصادر الروسية. ضيفنا هو البروفيسور نيكولاي دوبرونرافين. Welcome Professor, we are so glad to have you. المؤسسة التي ينتمي إليها ضيفنا العزيز هي المتحف الأنثروبولوجيا والأنتوغرافيا في سانت بطرسبوغ، المدينة الشهيرة أو العاصمة للاتحاد الروسي قديما. هذا المتحف والذي يعرف اختصارا بالكونستكاميرا، وهو تابع لأكاديمية العلوم الروسية. طبعا نبدأ بالسيرة الذاتية لضيفنا نيكولاي البروفيسور، الذي تخرج من كلية الدراسات الشرقية في سنة 1983 في جامعة لينينغراد الحكومية، وفي فترة 1986 إلى 2024 عمل عميدا وأستاذا مساعدا وأستاذا مشاركا وأستاذا في قسم الدراسات الأفريقية بكلية الدراسات الشرقية، وفي قسم السياسة العالمية بكلية العلاقات الدولية في جامعة سانت بطرسبورغ الحكومية. ومنذ عام 2024 يعمل في متحف الكونستكاميرا، الاسم الاختصار لمتحف الأنثروبولوجيا والإثنوغرافيا المشهور في روسيا. من بين إنتاجه الفكري ومؤلفاته التقليد الكتابي العربي في غرب أفريقيا الذي صدر له هذا المنتج في عام 1999، والروايات التاريخية في شمال غرب نيجيريا صدر له هذا المنتج عام 2004. الأغاني التاريخية للهوسة صدر له أيضا عام 2004. التحديث على الهامش: بقاء وتطور الدول غير المعترف بها في القرن العشرين وبداية القرن الحادي والعشرين في عام 2013. أيضا له مؤلف آخر: الإسلام في أفريقيا جنوب الصحراء 2015. شارك في بحوث ميدانية في بلدان عدة: نيجيريا، البرازيل، الأرجنتين، السودان، تنزانيا. سيرته حافلة. هو اليوم ضيفا عندنا في طرابلس، وفي هذا البودكاست سوف يحدثنا عن مسيرة الاستقلال من خلال مصادر لليبيا، من خلال المصادر الروسية أو الأرشيف الروسي. Welcome again, Professor. We are truly excited to hear from you about Libyan's path to independence through Russian sources. Thank you for making time for us. Let's start with the first question, Professor. Why Russian sources specifically about the history of Libya's independence? What do they provide that Western or Arab sources did not or don't?
Thanks a lot for the invitation. And first of all, I would like to mention in a few words that it was a great honor and a real surprise to see Tripoli and Libya so different from what you can hear from, let's say, from the general media. Concerning the first question, yes, Russian sources are somehow different for many reasons. First of all, until the beginning of the 20th century, Russian sources saw Libya as part of the competition or even struggle with the Ottoman Empire. So if you hear, let's say, about Libya, until that time it was mostly through the lenses of the competition with the Ottomans. After 1911, the situation changed drastically or dramatically because of the Italian occupation. Russian sources here are varied, not
it's okay.
Russian sources in this aspect are varied. On one hand, you have the official position of the Russian Empire, which actually had an agreement with Italy, not about the occupation, but about non-interference into the actions.
Interior affairs.
About the action of Italy in Libya. There was an agreement about non-interference, and this was not something unique because Italy, before coming to Tripoli,
Yes.
Italy signed such agreements with practically all European powers.
Yes.
So this is quite standard. On the other hand, Russian public opinion was either neutral or totally opposed to this. And I can even quote from some of the sources, because in Russian publications, in Russian media, of that time, you could see. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay, Professor. Yes. At that time, it was many powers we have in Europe. Germany has a power, England, France. They have a secret power with the Italian to invade Libya. And the Russian was... what?
And the official Russian position was comparable, because actually it was Italy. Actually, it was Italy that wanted non-interference from other powers. It was quite simple. Yeah?
Yes.
In exchange, Italy promised non-interference in Russia's position towards the Straits, Bosporus and Dardanelles, because Russia was keen about the Straits, let's say keen about Istanbul, and Italy promised that Russia could have a free hand in relations with the Ottomans. It's actually an interesting story. It repeated several times. Let's say Russia and other powers did honor their promises, but Italy just signed this document, but nothing followed out of it. So let's say there was a real Italian occupation, and after that, the public opinion in Russia was not sympathetic towards Italy. This is quite visible. So, for instance, in some of the media or some of the politicians in Russia used expressions like, I'm just quoting.
Yes, quoting.
Sorry.
It's okay.
They used expressions like naked act of political banditry. So you see the difference. Those who fought against the Tsars in Russia, they were also very critical towards Italy. This is quite visible. So why I am saying that? Just to explain what happened later. When there was a revolution in Russia in 1917, immediately let's say the new political parties started including, they did include Libya in their political discourse. This might be surprising for many, many people, but even if you look, for instance, at the famous political events, like the first Russian Congress of the Soviets, it was even before the Bolshevik Revolution, the Bolshevik or Communist Party proposed a resolution condemning Italian occupation of Tripoli. They used the word Tripoli.
Tripoli, not Libya, yes.
Yeah,
Libya comes later.
Yeah, they used the word Tripoli or Tripolitania. And when the new government, the new Bolshevik or communist, let's say, government came to power in Russia, when the Soviet Russia appeared, and later on the Soviet Union, the position was quite clear. It was a condemnation of Italy's occupation, and I could even quote, for instance, when there were discussions about the situation, in semi-official documents from Moscow, you could see expressions like There is a major movement in Tripoli, beginning from 1923. The Tripolitanians dealt a harsh blow to Mussolini. Their heroic struggle deprived Italy of the opportunity to continue the policy of violence. Tripolitania,
yes,
through unparalleled bravery, won the right to a more peaceful existence.
Okay.
So it was sort of discussion and semi-official discourse and practically official.
That's a great, Professor, but let me mention to this here. Soviet succeeded in their revolution in 1917. First war over, second war over, but the Russian Soviet voted against Libyan independence in 1949. What the Russian documents said about that? Is it a political maneuver against the West, or they refuse the independence itself?
This one, thanks a lot. This one is a relatively easy question because the answer would be neither nor. Meaning that the discussion about Libya's independence started not in 1949 but in 1945. And concerning the vote, probably just to clarify, it was not an abstract vote, it was a situation in the United Nations. And the position in this case, in this aspect, was quite clear. The Soviet Union was opposed not to Libya's independence, by the way. The Soviet Union was opposed to what the official documents called, or let's say the speeches in the United Nations called fake independence. So I can just quote directly. What did the Soviet representatives or Soviet diplomats mean by fake independence?
Yes, that's
it was quite clear from the very beginning. If the independence is proclaimed, but the military bases are still there, the British and American bases are there, and the whole policy of New Libya, if it is controlled by the British administration, then it would be...
Sorry for interrupting. So the objection about the military base, not the independence itself.
Yeah, exactly. The issue of the basis was practically crucial, and I remember some of the documents and some of the speeches when, for instance, a Russian diplomat would say, why is Moscow so, why does it care about the basis? Because of today's and even of that time technologies, meaning that the United States and the United Kingdom in the late 1940s had enough capacity to use the military bases in Libya in a future, in a possible war against the Soviet Union. Actually, the distance is not so big, it's not too far. Even with the air technologies of 1940s, it would just be a few hours for the bombing facilities from the US and the UK to reach Russia or the Soviet Union. So it was more, what people use as an expression, real politics. Not just something abstract. It was very concrete situation, and there was a very real fear that if the real situation in Libya is just controlled by the British, someone can proclaim an independence. But if it's still a real military danger, then of course the Soviet Union would be opposed. And by the way, immediately, actually even before the proclamation of independence, before the declaration of independence, the Soviet Union proposed another resolution at the UN saying that, okay, with the independence, but asking for the immediate closure of the military bases. So it was always the issue.
Okay, Professor. In this case, let me tell you that the military bases is still in Libya after independence declaration, 1951. But some says, let me tell you about that. Some said the Soviet Union opposed independence in 1949 and then recognized Libya and established diplomatic relations in 1955. How can we understand this paradox?
Again,
we have still military bases.
True. But here there is something else, and this is a new equation, by the way. Starting in the late 1940s, there was a very visible and new phenomenon in the Middle East, and let's say just in the Arab world. Starting, and this is also very visible in the documents, starting with by the end of 1940s, there was a new bloc at the United Nations. There was a new set of activities, and gradually, and I would even say even rapidly, the Soviet Union found new allies. Starting, actually there was a single country which was always mentioned, starting with Egypt. Egypt, after 1952, cooperated with the Soviet Union on many issues at the United Nations. And we cannot just say that the Soviet Union ignored the Arab world. Quite the contrary. Actually, you can easily see from the discussions that the Soviet Union did care about the opinion of the Arab countries, but primarily Egypt from the very start.
So we can say
revolutionary Egypt.
We can say the relationship with the Egypt encouraged the Soviet Union to have a new one with Libya.
Yeah, we can say so, and not just Libya, because with the new developments, initially it would be Egypt and a little bit of, let's say, Syria. Then other countries followed, like when the independence came to Morocco and Tunisia. Again, it was a new start. But the very first one was Egypt.
Yes.
So starting with Egypt,
the main base,
if you like. No, it's not just because of base. It was because, let's say, the Soviet Union was listening to the new Egyptian authorities, to the new Egyptian government. And Egypt, by the way, was quite active. As everybody knows, of course. Egypt was quite active in positioning itself as the center for the Arab voice, if you like. And the Soviet Union did care about that. So when you're asking about the basis, I guess this was a major change, because before the Soviet Union had, let's say, its own view. But there was no Arab partner, if you like. Because if you look at 1945, what was Egypt in 1945? These were just, still practically controlled by the British.
Okay, not away from this question, maybe for me, not for the audience. I have a small question. Who owned the Soviet veto at that time? Stalin himself, or the mission of Soviet Union, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Soviet Union? Who owned that veto?
There was always a coordination, and this is standard, by the way, meaning that if you think about 1940s, you remember, we have just discussed, by the way, that the Soviet Union, almost until the end of the Soviet period, was a single-party state. It's not just about Stalin or a ministry. It means that all the decisions had to be, if you like, ratified or discussed, at least discussed for sure, at the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So you could not just say that diplomats decided something. They did follow the line.
The Communist Party in Moscow, he owned the veto.
It's not about owning the veto. It's about the discussion of the policy. There were practical situations, some small cases where you would find some, if you like, maneuver or whatever, but in general, at that time, and not just because of Lenin or Stalin or whoever, just the whole concept was that the leading power in the Soviet Union, okay, let's say the power belongs to the workers, or then it belonged to the people of the Soviet Union. But in practical political terms, everything had, or such decisions, major decisions, had to be discussed or ratified by the Central Committee. I don't know how it compares to Libya, for instance, but it was not a single person's rule. I understand what you asked about. You could not say just it's a single decision by Stalin to think about Libya. Not so from every document that
this
we
is
can
a question
see.
for me, not for the audience.
Yes, from what I can say.
Yes, I want to know the veto.
There was always a discussion. You could not, and by the way, always with signatures. So you could not see a situation when just a single person said, we want to do something with Libya. No, this is impossible just because there were rules of conduct, there were procedures, and in these procedures there was so-called political bureau, is the highest level, then you would say Central Committee of the Communist Party, then the Congress of the Communist Party, and the government, which was, of course, independent in terms of, let's say, technical,
and they have recommendation for.
Technical work, of course, and recommendations could come from the diplomats, for instance. Actually, they had to give recommendations. It was their job.
But I was wrong when I thought that Stalin, he owned everything, even the veto of the Soviet. So I'm wrong.
If you look, a very typical Western view, by the way. I remember some of the documents which are published now, when, for instance, a British diplomat starts the discussion in Moscow with the question, how is the health of Generalissimo Stalin? What does he decide or what does he say about foreign policy of the Soviet Union? And there was a very nice explanation from the minister, Mr. Molotov at that time, who said, yes, let's say the health is fine, Mr. Stalin is fine, but if you think about the foreign policy, Mr. Stalin listens to a lot of advice, which was just true, and the technical, or let's say the political decisions would be made by the political bureau of the Central Committee, first of all, and they would give general recommendations. It does not mean that personally Stalin or Khrushchev or Brezhnev would write everything about Tripoli. They just didn't have time to do this.
So I'm wrong. Okay, back to our questions about
please.
Yes, Professor, the Russian documents, which one that surprised you the most or changed your perspective about the history of independence of Libya? Which documents that you changed, surprised you, or changed you about for your perspective and the story of Libyan's independence? You remember that? Any documents?
What I would say in this aspect is what is surprising is what is missing. Because, as we already discussed it, the history of Russia's relation or Russia's view of Libya independence does not start in 1945. So if you look at some of the Libyan documents, or Libyan, let's say not documents, Libyan researchers, you could see some of them writing or saying that the first Libyan delegation came as early as 1917. I did not see any proof for that.
1917. You don't have a proof.
Immediately after the revolution, I don't see any proof. By now, I guess it's possible, but no such proof. On the contrary, it's quite easy to say, yes, that there were early contacts in 1920, and there was actually there was a Libyan presence at the so-called First Congress of the Peoples of the East, and the person who spoke on behalf of Libya was not a Libyan, by the way. The person who spoke in the Soviet context on behalf of Algeria, Tunisia, Tripoli, Egypt, Arabia, and Hindustan was a person you probably know, Enver Pasha from Turkey. He came to the Soviet Union.
Pasha.
Enver Pasha, one of the leaders who actually fought in Libya.
Anwar Pasha.
Yeah,
Anwar Pasha.
Yes,
Some
yes,
sources,
Anwar
yes.
Pasha. You can
Anwar
say.
Pasha is very famous. He is found in Libya.
Yeah,
1911. Yes.
Yeah, because he did participate in the fighting here. Yeah. So he came to the at that time it was Soviet Russia before Soviet Union, and he actually proclaimed himself as the leader or representative of the oppressed Muslims of the region, including Tripoli.
Yeah, at the time it was an Ottoman Empire, so he has a right to pretend that
exactly.
a leader.
Yeah. After that, it's more complicated because, as I mentioned, there was a governmental position and there was a very interesting organization called Communist International. And Communist International officially was separate from the government of Russia or Soviet Union, but for all practical purposes, there was a coordination. And what was surprising to me was how little it was about Libya. So if you see Russian publications, you see a lot of support for the struggle for independence.
Yes.
There was a lot of support. But on the other hand, if you look at the documents which you can find in the archives, these are very few until now. For instance, I can just share, for 1925, you would find a document from Tripoli, but it's different from today's perspective. It was actually a document from Italian communists who fought against Mussolini, but in Libya.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So it's a little bit different from today's perspective. Not about, let's say, the Arab or Muslim resistance. Yeah, it's another story. Concerning 1940s, if you say, was there any surprise? Yes, I can tell you, and I will probably elaborate during the lecture. The real surprise was not just about Russian sources. It was about the comparative side. Because there are a few instances when you have meetings, for instance, between Soviet diplomats and Italians or American diplomats about Libya.
Yes.
And you have the minutes. Someone would expect that it would be similar, but it's not. Like we are talking with you, normally you would think that the results would be similar, right?
Yes.
You remember what we talked about, and I remember, and probably should be, should be similar, right?
Of course.
But in the case of the discussions between Russians or Soviet diplomats and Americans, even the length of the discussion, even the schedule of the questions differs. Yes. So it's very interesting to see how the sides or how the participants saw or how they recorded the discussions. So if you ask, for instance, what did the Soviet diplomats say about Libya's independence? If you turn to the American record of these
British.
British. Actually, the British did not publish as extensively. The best thing probably about the American one. You will see that the Americans tried to, everybody had his own view, let's say.
Yes.
So if you look at just one example, if you look at the American side, the American minutes of these discussions, they start with Libya, and they say, and the Soviet side continues with the usual Soviet propaganda. So it's not, you see, it's like what you read in the media about
this is the language at that time, I think, during the Cold War. This is the kind of language spread widely.
Yeah, so it's not a real record.
Yes,
it's already a commentary. And if you ask me, what was the real discussion? And again, there are memoirs. From the memoirs of Mr. Gromyko, who participated in the discussions about Libya also, you can see a reference to an incident when Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, Mr. Molotov, even decided to leave the room because he felt offended by the British attitude to the whole discussion. And so, according to the memoirs, Mr. Gromyko had to interfere just to, to make the situation a little bit calmer, because they were almost going to fight each other. Yeah?
Yes.
But if you look at the British sources, you don't find this. They said everything was calm, which was not.
Yes, Professor. That's very fascinating.
And it was also about Libya.
Anyway, Professor, really, time is running fast, Professor. But final one, do you have any ads or recommendation for Libyan researchers should know about regarding their country's independence?
Yeah, I think so. Concerning Libyan sources and Libyan research, already I must congratulate Libya, because I already saw a few Libyan publications about Russian archives. So you don't need to go to Russia for that. You can just take a few books already translated or published in Libya. Yes. Published by Libyan researchers, by the way.
You have a title?
Yes, I will provide it just to be exact about it with the title. I will provide it during the lecture, even with the photo. Of course,
you have a lecture here.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I must say it makes the things easier. So you already have the base. What can go on to proceed? It's very important, I guess, to go beyond the usual sources, because the United Nations sources are fairly available, let's say. But as concerns Italian colonial sources, I'm not so sure. Some of these were published, some apparently not. And ultimately, I'm sure that the research should begin at home. If we are talking about Libyan interest or Libyan view of Libya's way to the independence, it's quite logical to start with Libyan archives. So this is maybe for the new generation of Libyan researchers. But as concerns Russia, which I'm really happy about, nowadays Russian archives are much more open than before. For instance, it might be interesting for you also. Now, Russian archives are mostly, not all, but mostly open until 1970s. So it means already with the time of, let's say, 1969 in Libya, you can already have an access to Russian sources. So even beyond the independence, up to this era of post 1969. So maybe it would be good for Libyan scholars to continue cooperation, because what I saw were a few dissertations, for instance, if you some work by Libyan scholars until, let's say, the end of the Soviet Union. I don't know any recent work by Libyan scholars concerning Russian sources. But actually, we've already started the discussion at the center here about possible future cooperation in this. So I cannot advertise for the center, but it looks like there are expectations that it could continue.
I think, Professor, you have more to tell us in your lecture. Maybe our podcast comes to end, so I have to finish with you, Professor. Thank you so much. It was very fascinating to tell us about the story of Libyan's independence, and during the Russian archives and the collection. We truly appreciate your time, and I wish you pleasant days here in Libya. السادة المشاهدين، في نهاية هذا البودكاست تقبلوا مني خالص الشكر والامتنان، وكذلك فريق العمل الخاص بالبودكاست في مركز ليبيا للأبحاث والدراسات. كان محدثكم وسام صالح من طرابلس الغرب. تحياتي لكم.